no gold is not enough.
So, hello everybody from the channel. It's been a while since I was not talking to the best in the world. We have one of them today here, Mr. Tony. Tony, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you. We were planning this a long ago, and finally we made it. I've been hearing from you since I started this journey in 2012 with
hmm
Mr. Todd Conklin. So,
hmm
first the very first day your name was surrounding my experiences, so it's a pleasure. And also my audience here in Brazil and South America, they are asking all the time, hey, we are missing Tony, we are missing Tony. So that's why I was booing you a lot, say hey, let's make it happen. So thank you so much.
It's my honor, Hugo. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. So, I want to start about giving your background. So, how did you get passionate about this safety stuff, most about human and organizational performance? Because you are one of the top of mind when we mention this issue.
Well, I appreciate that. You know, I was in the U.S. Navy at the beginning of my career, right out of college. By the way, I went to the U.S. Naval Academy and had a personal interview with Admiral Rickover, who was the father of the nuclear navy, and he's got a high set of standards for performance in the nuclear uh, uh, propulsion systems for the U.S. Navy. But regardless of that, I got selected, regardless of the fact that I was probably the lowest in my class as far as those selected for nuclear power. But I was still in the upper half. But anyway, uh, besides that, I went into the submarine service, and then I qualified in submarines. But during my training period, this was back in 1975, 76. I was a trainee, and I had a near death experience. I was, the Navy had a policy that before you start an electric driven pump, that you had to rotate the shaft by hand. You had to actually put your hand on the shaft and see if it would move, so make sure that before you start it would rotate. And in a nuclear propulsion system, it's noisy. You got a lot of rotating equipment, and you got a lot of steam flow. And I went to the wrong pump. There were two pumps. One was running, one was stopped. So I had to start the idle pump, and I got confused which side of the ship I was on. I was supposed to start the port side, which is on the left side of the ship, but I got turned around and I went to the wrong side. And I came within probably 2-3 inches of actually touching a rotating element at 3,600 RPMs. And the likely consequence would have been I would have passed away. I would have been killed instantly. So I've had that near death experience, and there's been other occasions in my lifetime where I've had close calls, and it's not because I'm a accident prone individual. It's just I was around a lot of industrial equipment, and but that was a hallmark in my career. I went to submarine school, spent some time training uh, uh, other officers and enlisted people on how to operate nuclear power plants. And then I resigned my commission in 1982 and went to work for Westinghouse Electric, became a simulator instructor. I used to train nuclear power plant operators how to operate nuclear reactors, how to start up, shut down, and operate the electric generating system. So in essence, I'm an operator at heart. I got an engineering degree in college in mechanical engineering, but that's the last time I did any engineering was in college. And so when I went through the submarine service, I basically became an operator. and that's been my mindset. In fact, I've had the opportunity to write 2 books. One was called Risk-Based Thinking, which was published in 2017, and then the more recent one is Critical Steps, and both those books have an operations perspective to them. So so I'm an operator at heart. Going back to my time as a simulator instructor, I got an invite from the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations in Atlanta, Georgia, to join them, and they were looking for simulator instructors to be part of their training evaluator cadre. And so I took a job there in 1985, and it was during those first couple of years as a training evaluator that I heard about this program called HPES, Human Performance Enhancement System, and it was developed because the accident at 3 Mile Island was triggered by human error, and by the operators, the control room operators, and those were the people I had been training at this other nuclear utility that I was working for under with Westinghouse Electric. But I started looking into it, and perhaps you've already encountered this in your own career, Hugo, but you find out what your real passions are. And when I started looking into human performance, I realized I like this stuff. This stuff rings true to me, and I see a need for the industry to better manage this thing called human error. Yeah. And so I got involved with the human performance department. There was a department in the institute in IMPO called the Human Performance Department, and this was in 1988 timeframe, and I wanted to learn more about human performance, and I heard about this book called Human Error by Dr. James Reason, and so I got a hold of that, and I just could not put it down. I mean, it was one of those milestones in a person's career. You realize this is what I'm called to do. This is what the good Lord's given me a chance to do. And so I read it. I think I've read it back, cover to cover 2 or 3 different times, because he was an academic. James Reason was an academic, and at the University of Manchester in England, and so there were a lot of long sentences in that book, so I had to reread it a few times just to make sense of some of the concepts. But one of the concepts was latent conditions. That was a new concept to me, that there were these conditions that lay dormant in an organization that could strike at any time. So I took that aboard. But not long after that, the industry realized, the commercial nuclear industry in the United States realized that the predominant trigger for events, when I say events, these are minor events that didn't cause any damage to the reactor core or any damage to, outside of the property of the utility, but the predominant trigger was human performance. It had transitioned from equipment engineering failures to human performance failures, and so I became a part of a committee, if you will, subcommittee at the institute to look at this condition related to human performance. And I had the opportunity in the mid 1990s, 95, 96 timeframe, to write a small booklet called Excellence in Human Performance. And it was during that time I had the opportunity to go and visit and spend some time with Dr. James Reason about the content of this book. And it was basically a set of behaviors at an individual worker level, a set of behaviors for leaders or managers in an organization. And then there was a third section on the organization's role in human performance. And in retrospect, I'm looking back, and it was about that time that high reliability was starting to come into the picture, and the idea that organizations and systems had an impact on human performance was a new idea. In fact, there was a lot of new words that started to be bounced around in the industry, like behavior. there was a lot of old school engineers that said, well, we don't talk about behavior, much less hyphenated words like error likely situations or latent organizational weaknesses. So there was a new vocabulary that was being developed for our industry to talk about these things related to the risk, this residual risk called human fallibility. And so managers didn't understand how to do this. So one of the outcomes of this committee was to train the industry on human performance. Back in those days, we called it human performance for the lack of a better word. But in the late 1990s, 98, 99 timeframe, we did some training. And it was also during this time I met Rob Fisher. Rob Fisher was doing human performance at a nuclear utility in Texas, and so I was collaborating with him, and he was also involved with the training that we did. So that's when I met him, and so we've been, lifelong friends as well as colleagues for quite a while. So we did a road show. Another individual, myself, did a road show in the nuclear industry, training utility folks on the basis of fundamentals of human performance. So that went on for a couple of years, and then in 2003, 2004, I took a temporary assignment at a nuclear power plant. Actually, it was at Tennessee Valley Authority. And so I was the human performance manager for Tennessee Valley Authority's 3 nuclear stations. And so I assisted the management teams at those 3 nuclear facilities on how to address, human performance. And it was during that period of time, 2003, 2004, where the idea of critical steps came to the forefront. And it rang true with the management team there, and we rolled out this idea of critical steps. Critical step being defined as, that human action that will trigger immediate, irreversible, intolerable harm to an asset if you lose control of that action or a preceding action. So I can unpack that a little bit later, but that was the idea. And so I did another road show at TVA, training supervisors and managers on critical steps. And then shortly after that, I went back to IMPO and wrote several documents for the industry. One was human performance tools for workers, human performance tools for engineers, human performance tools for supervisors and managers. And also during this time, we put out a document in 2006, a reference manual. We call it a human performance reference manual. And it was during this time frame I met Earl Carnes, who was my point of contact at the Department of Energy, and they were interested in the human performance. So this is when I met Todd Conklin. So I met Todd Conklin when he and several of his colleagues from Los Alamos came to IMPO, and we taught them the human performance fundamentals course that had been developed in the late 90s. So Earl took our human performance reference manual, and then through a memorandum of agreement between IMPO and the Department of Energy, they used the human performance reference manual and those other good practices that I had written earlier about, human performance tools, and they developed 2 handbooks. One was volume 1 and one is volume 2. The human performance fundamentals book, I can't remember right off the top of my head what the title is, but it was volumes, handbook, human performance handbook, volume 1 and volume 2. So it was basically using the IMPO document, and became public domain through the Department of Energy. But so I decided, I took the early retirement. I turned 55 back in 2007, 2008. And decided to take an early retirement and start my own consulting to see if this human performance methodology would apply outside of nuclear. And sure enough, it has. You know, Westinghouse was my first client, obviously, since I had worked for them, and they knew the value of it. And then I got some calls from General Electric. I think this was in 2009, 2010, and we started talking about human performance because they were interested in the serious injury and fatality concept. And most of the time a lot of times I've been called because of from industrial safety or occupational safety needs. So in our initial conversation, I started talking about human performance, and I mentioned to my contact that in Europe, human performance tends to have a negative connotation, that there's something wrong with the person, and they prefer in Europe, they call it human and organizational factors. And
Yeah.
so I suggested, well, maybe here in the United States we could call it human and organizational performance. And my contact he blurted out, HOP. We're going to call it HOP. And I thought to myself, you know, that doesn't sound really dignified, you know. And so HOP, you know, we're going to call it HOP. But anyway, I've always been a proponent of I refer to it as human and organizational performance, or H and OP. And so you'll hear me say H and OP instead of HOP, but because I want to emphasize that.
HOP sounds easier, so that's why.
Yeah, then I don't blame anybody for using that short term vernacular, but I like to emphasize that and symbol in the abbreviation, because I want to emphasize that because I want to remind managers and executives that they are a big part of this issue. And so I talk about human and organizational performance. And I think that's because I think of human performance as individually oriented, but H&OP is system oriented.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good catch. I will start using this as well. So Tony, seems like you are one of the founders of what we have today, you know, because most of the people that know HOP, at least, or HOP, H and OP here in Brazil, and other places that I've been visiting, talking about it, they think everything started by the both handbooks from the OE.
Right.
You know, but you told us a long previous story about it. So, first of all, congratulations on this struggling and difficult job to put everything together. I wanna, if you have it, the links or something from this previous job, I will, you know, tell people about it because it was the, you know, the founding rock from what we have today, and most of us others still think that HNOP started by Todd Conklin's book, that it's much more recent and less profound.
Well, he's an outstanding spokesperson for
Yeah,
HNOP. You know, he's got a PhD in organizational communications. I think that's right. But yeah, the point I want to make about HNOP is it's not science. A lot of people think it's science. It's not science. It is not science. And by the way, you know, I'm not a PhD. I'm not an academic. My focus, my perspective on human performance, human and organization performance, is as an operator. As an operator.
Like me, I don't have a PhD as well, so everything that I know was on practice, and I tested everything. Some things didn't work, some things worked well. And so I'm with you. You know, I have floor experience, shop floor experience about it. So talking a little bit about practice, you mentioned that there are small written and small books, I don't know, manuals with practices and tools and everything. From your experience, what you see that worked better or worked well as human and organizational performance tools in the companies? Because this is always something that people ask. Okay, I agree, makes sense, blah blah blah. But what can I do in practice? So,
Hmm.
what would you tell about
Well,
it?
well, one of the things that I adopted early on was, the human performance tools was basically an evolutionary thing that started in the commercial nuclear industry, in the aviation industry, in the military, because there was a number of techniques that were used by those organizations. And what we did in the mid 1990s at IMPO is let's compile these. Let's put these together and provide these as one document that would be useful to the industry. And that was at first it was just a list, informal list, and then in 2004 2005 timeframe we decided to make it a publication at IMPO, and that's when we came out with the first document was a human performance tools for engineers, because engineers needed some techniques on how to avoid making mistakes with their designs. But when back in 2006, the first resilience engineering book was published by Eric Holdnagel et al. There's a number of others. I think
Yeah,
Nancy Levinson was
yeah.
involved, but uh, and the idea of what were the cornerstones? The cornerstones of resilience engineering were four habits, what I call habits of thought: anticipate, monitor, respond, learn. And that's been reinforced over the years. And so there's a history that goes along with those techniques. And what I realized is that human performance tools exercise one or more of those cornerstones. So probably one of the most effective or strongest human performance tools is called self-checking.
Yeah.
Stop, think, act, review, sometimes called STAR, stop, think, act, review in the English language. And if you think about STAR, stop, think, act, review, it exercises all four elements of
Yes.
risk-based thinking, what I call risk-based thinking. Risk-based thinking is anticipate, monitor, respond, and learn. And so all the human performance tools will exercise one or more elements of the cornerstones or risk-based thinking.
Totally
So
agree.
yeah,
And
so
with
so
the coming concept of learning groups, the learning part of it is even more included in the human
mhm.
performance tools.
But
But
to
keep going.
exercise those tools, frontline workers must possess the technical expertise and understanding of the technology they're working with. So maybe
Yeah.
this is part of my operator background coming to the forefront here. But if you don't understand the technology, if all you're doing is following the steps of a procedure and not understanding what you're doing, here in the United States we call that cookbooking.
Yeah.
You
The
cookbooking,
same
you're
here.
following a recipe and
The
not
same
really
here.
thinking.
Yeah. So, for example, I know everything about, not everything, but a lot about human organizational performance. But if you give me a plane to pilot, I cannot implement the concepts because I have no clue about the technology. So
Exactly.
I agree with you with this balance between knowing, the thing, your thing, doing good, your thing, and after that, start implementing the cornerstones of the human organizational performance, things that need to work together.
They do.
Agreed.
And I'm a big proponent of principles. And I liked what Todd put out. He published his principles
Principles.
document back in
I
2018.
translated his book for Portuguese, The Five Principles of Human.
Yeah, yeah. Well, depending on who you read, there's a number of principles out there other
There's
than Todd's.
20, other they have five. In
you know,
the
I
DOE manual, it's 20 principles, right?
DOE, no, DOE was 5. In
Five
fact,
already.
when we published back in the mid 90s, when we published Excellence in Human Performance, we part of that booklet was 5 principles. That was the first 5 principles, because I realized that that the fundamental issue is not the frontline worker. The fundamental issue is management. Management has to understand these concepts, and you cannot. I'm a proponent that you cannot anticipate every harmful scenario, but you can be ready for anything. That's
Yeah.
a contradiction, apparent contradiction of terms. But
Yeah.
the way you can be ready is understand the principles, understand the cornerstones or risk-based thinking elements, and you can respond or adapt as needed. But
Yeah, I use an analogy about sports. For example, if you are fighting, boxing, for example,
mhm,
you need to do some working out, some lifting. You know, this is you cannot prevent being punched, but you can be strong enough to support them. So,
there you go.
you know, lifting is the basis for every other sports. You are preparing yourself for the worst scenario. But it's tough to be inculcated in management heads, you know, because they always, maybe because it's cheaper, try to prevent everything better than being prepared for everything.
Mhm. That's a great analogy. The boxing analogy is a great one. I got to remember that. I just wrote that down. But so I challenge managers, before I go in with a uh, uh, to go into with a client and talk to that organization about human and organizational performance, I must sit down and have a half day with the leadership team of the organization. And part of that are the principles. Part of that is my approach to human and organizational performance. And if they buy into it, and if they if they understand and accept the principles associated with H&OP, then we can go forward. But if they can't buy into it, that's the point I want to cut bait, so to speak, and we'll go our different ways.
I think this is the maybe the only methodology that you start from the CEO or the operations director and go down. Usually others you start from the operators up, like BBS. We start trying to control people's behavior from the shop floor, and then the management sees the results. But HOP or HNOP, you do the opposite. You know, you need to tell them, hey, you need to working out. You need to
Yeah,
use
well,
some muscle.
they need to understand the business case. There's a strong business case for H&OP.
Exactly.
And when I say business case, there's a set of benefits. There are costs associated, but there is risk if you don't do it. And there's also studies in Europe and I reference these in my book, Risk-Based Thinking. There's studies in Germany and the Netherlands about the advantages and benefits from a I can't think of the term right now, but there's financial benefits from having some kind of error management approach to your operation. So that's important. But the managers, they need to understand that business case, but at the same time, they have to understand that it's a radical change in
Yeah.
thinking. It's radical in the sense that you're not. I think Todd has mentioned this several times, that the issue is not making workers safe. It's about the organization creating the context for success, the context for actually performing work and not losing control, but able to accomplish your intended outcomes.
Yeah. Every time your last barrier is people performing 100%, you have no barrier. So
That's right. That's right.
that's
One of the
the
things I noticed, one of the questions on your list is, what's my view of safety?
yeah.
And is that all right to jump into that at this point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanna know people's you know, thinking about it, because
Mhm,
describing something, you know, makes us to implement. So
mhm.
that's why I always do this question to all my EVTs.
Well, H&OP, there's a number, there's HRO, high reliability organizing. They have a set of tenets that are, I think, important. And in the book, Carl White talks about the 5 tenets of HRO in his book, Managing the Unexpected. And the 3rd edition, actually, there's 3 editions. You ought to get all 3. But David Woods and his co-authors in Behind Human Error, there's a number of principles there. So I have my own set of principles in risk-based thinking, and Todd's got his principles. And I would encourage an organization, if they're thinking about wading into this area of H&OP, then they ought to look at the principles. What are the key principles that you have to adhere to in order to be successful for your organization? All right. Now, one of the principles that I adopt that may not necessarily be clear in other sets of principles is risk. Risk is part of the design of the organization, design of the technology. Risk is residual. I talk about residual risk. There's 2 residual risk in every organization, every industrial organization. The first one is obviously human fallibility. People make mistakes, and periodically they will lose control of transfers of energy. They may lose control of transfers or movements of matter, solids, liquids, or gases going from one place to another, or it might be a loss of control of information or data or software updates, so the idea that human fallibility and human error, and I believe human error is still a real issue. I don't avoid using that word. There's some people, some academics that have relegated the idea of human error as sort of a negative connotation to, that somebody made a mistake. There must be something wrong with that person. Human error.
It's natural.
It's natural. It's normal. And but when a human error causes a loss of control of energy, matter, or information, and there's consequences, there's harm as a result, loss, damage, injury, fatalities, then that's the risk that we have to anticipate. The second residual risk is complex adaptive systems. And that's where the management team comes into play. And there's no such thing as a perfect procedure. There's no such thing as a perfect design. There's no such thing as perfect training. And so the managers do their best given their resources, but they cannot anticipate every harmful scenario that the worker may encounter when they're doing the work. And so procedures are always developed with an assumption of initial conditions. And so the workers have to have that technical expertise, that understanding to be able to adapt, to adjust when necessary in the workplace. So one of the things that I've refocused on, I focus on the frontline worker as part of my approach to human and organizational performance. So I take a little bit of a nuanced approach, and I see the biggest real-time risk for an organization is frontline workers performing high hazard work in the workplace. And so when I talk about safety, I'm not talking just about personnel safety or occupational safety. I'm also talking about safety of property, safety of safety of equipment, safety of the environment, and so I talk about people, property, and product, and so that was the real motivation behind my second book, which I co-wrote with Ron Ferris and Jim Marinas, who are also, they're former DOE, Department of Energy employees, and they're also former Navy nukes. They were in the U.S. Navy just like myself, and so we collaborated and wrote this book. I don't know if you can see it.
Yes, critical steps.
Yeah. So we wrote that book, and again, it's focused at during work performance, helping the frontline workers recognize which actions absolutely have to go right first time every time. And again, I mentioned technical expertise. That's a predecessor to actually performing critical steps safely.
Yeah, great insights, Tony. So, you've been in many companies, most of them really complex process, high risk, what we can put in the first level of high risk, nuclear plants, Navy and everything. Uh, what do you see nowadays in companies that back in time you thought wouldn't be playing still today? Something that you say, oh, this shouldn't be still
Mhm.
being considered. Is there something that you see when you see, you say, it's still that?
Yeah, yep,
We
you're
still
right.
believe in it.
I've done a lot of work with biotech, the
Okay.
biotech industry. Yeah, these are high tech organizations that produce drug substances, generally the kind that are injectable into
Okay.
via syringes or and that kind of thing. So and one of the problems I run into with biotech is that they hire very smart people. Some of their operators have PhDs.
Mm,
And I'm not talking about researchers, I'm talking about operators. These are the people who actually produce. They do a lot of hands-on work in producing these drug substances, and but the problem that I found, and this is across the entire industry, is they don't put a lot of investment in upfront training, technical training. For the most part, they will hire a new hire, bring that person in, and give them what I call a C daddy. A C daddy, an experienced colleague, and they'll follow that experienced worker around for 6 months, 6 months or so, or even longer. And they learn the work through on-the-job training. And there's not a whole lot of upfront technical knowledge development in the processes. So what they're learning how to do is follow the procedure. They're learning how to follow what they call a batch record, which is a record of all the data that's involved with the quality and purity of the drug substance through the process. And so that continues to be a problem I see in that industry and other industries, is not enough upfront training to build up this knowledge that necessary to in many cases to adapt and adjust when they need to, when the procedure isn't quite right.
yeah.
Another issue that I run into is managers have a tendency to be overly optimistic about their systems. They think they don't want, they think that because they designed it and they put their signature on the bottom line saying I approve of this process, that it's safe and it's okay to go forward. But again, they don't have a crystal ball and they can't anticipate every nuance or every harmful scenario that the worker might encounter.
And they forget a fundamental rule that past success doesn't guarantee future success,
There you
So
are. Yeah, yeah. And related to that is this issue on procedures. Now,
rely on procedures for everything, like it was the Bible.
exactly, and that's I would say, I would be the first one to say, based on my operating experience, that following a procedure is one of the safest things that an operator can do. All right, because basically, the human being, as you well know, Hugo, you can't remember everything. You cannot remember, the sequence, the correct sequence of more than 7 or 8 things, and so you need a checklist or some kind of
Yeah.
guidance to help you do complex, or not complex, but necessarily complicated processes. But there's a belief that if you follow the procedure, and this is still prevalent today in a lot of the organizations I've worked with, that if you follow the procedure, compliance equals safety. And that's a dangerous concept in the minds of many managers.
Yeah, in Brazil we have a lot of delivering by motorcycles. You know, those guys, boom, 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 delivering everything from food to everything you can imagine. And it's not rare. They doing their job correctly, dying because they are in a motorcycle. And if you are right in a motorcycle and you crash with a car that is wrong, you're gonna die. So
That's right.
following the procedure is not always will save your life, you know, because there is
I have
some
a sad
interference from the activity.
Yeah, I have a sad story related to that. My younger brother owned a motorcycle. I think it was a Kawasaki 750, a big motorcycle. And so I took it out for a ride because I was interested in motorcycles, and I took it 20 miles up into the country and drove it back home. And I realized this is too much power between my legs. That was the last time. That was the last time, and you're too exposed. And so that was the last time I rode a motorcycle. I've never ridden a motorcycle since then. So I realized it was just a dangerous environment.
Yeah, there are some activities that you cannot control everything,
Yeah.
and when you do, following the procedure is not enough. Hiding a
Right.
motorcycle is one of those.
So I
Clear.
would say those are the most common. Managers tend to believe that their designs are robust and and perfect. They have a tendency to think that they don't like. What's funny? I've gone into organizations and told them where their faults are. I do assessments as one of the first activities that I get involved with a client, and they don't like anyone calling their baby ugly.
Yeah.
So I have no problem, since I'm not an employee. I go in and say, this is
But
broken.
what's weird, what is weird is that they are asking somebody to check their system and they don't want to listen the truth, you know.
That's
So
right.
they want to hire you to tell them that their baby is handsome,
It's
is beautiful.
just beautiful, but I don't see. I spent 23 years in the commercial nuclear industry, and that's what I had to do. I had to go in and tell a plant manager, "Hey, your training is ugly. Your human performance is ugly. This is not working."
If there is something that you recognize from a far distance, is an ugly child, you know. Tony, what about the opposite? What makes your eyes shine when you are in a company? Is there something that you see that say, hey, here it's something that is being well done, that you dreamed when you founded this way of thinking, that you see your breed, your construction in practice, and you have some pride about it?
Well, I in my own professional career, I've had people give me calls and inform me that what I do saves lives.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, I've had representatives from the Department of Energy and in fact, the National Safety Council here in the United States has endorsed this book, Critical Steps, and they make the clear statement that it saves lives. And so, and I've also had the opportunity to work with, I go back to biotech industry and work with organizations that have developed not necessarily a new drug, but developed a process that can save people from various types of cancer. And so I've been asked to come in and help with, because those processes are very manually oriented. There's a lot of hands-on work associated with those processes. And so I've had the opportunity to go in and look at those activities and provide feedback on especially critical step, because if there's certain steps in the process that if you lose control of it, you basically have you have a good chance of killing someone because of someone dying of cancer, because it's usually at this point in the patient's uh, uh, in the patient's experience with the cancer, this is a last ditch effort to save that person. So if an operator makes a mistake, it's generally the person is going to pass away before they can respond to it. So I've had the opportunity to work in that environment. So that's the thing that sort of gives me a sense. Pride is not the right word, but satisfaction, knowing that I've done something, I'm doing something that will save lives. But I also talk about livelihoods.
Yeah.
Livelihoods, because people's livelihoods are at stake. If an organization doesn't survive, they go out of business because of people's mistakes. That's another avenue that's important going as far as using H&OP.
Yeah, and you can be proud or satisfied also about having being a multiplier. You know, your concepts, your ideas are spread around the world. People are uh, following up what or continuing what you guys started in the past. You mentioned that 1982 was the year I was born, so that I have a huge respect for you guys, because I started when I took when I took the bar, it was already, there was some concreted path for us to follow. So we cannot forget about it. I have a real respect for those who came before me, and that's why I I treat it as a jewelry, you know. So thank you for this, Tony. We are coming to the end. It's almost 1 hour. Time flies when we are having a good
You kidding me?
conversation.
You kidding me? Goodness.
Yeah. So I want to give you some time to talk about what you are currently doing, about how people can find you, the books, and everything. We wanna talk. Feel free.
Okay, well, these books are available. The one book, Critical Step, I mentioned, and also this one, Risk-Based Thinking.
Risk-based thinking.
Yeah, this is a basically my thinking about human and organizational performance, and I call it risk-based thinking. It's not associated with the quality assurance idea of risk-based thinking. This is associated with the cornerstones of resilience engineering and high reliability. And what I basically do in that book is just highlight my approach to human and organizational performance. Related to that, I've written the book Risk-Based Thinking. We've written a book, Critical Steps, and part of my approach to human performance has 3 core functions. The third core function is systems learning. And so right now we're exploring. I got some co-authors that I'm working with, and we're looking at how can we help organizations, especially the line managers, do a better job of aligning their systems to support successful performance of the frontline workers, given that they're fallible human beings, and given that they can't design all functions in an operation without the need of human performance. So how do you help align that organization to support successful performance, and not losing control of those high risk operations in the plant? So we're exploring that. Hopefully, maybe if God willing, that we might put out this book, a third book in 2024. That's what we're anticipating as far as systems learning. Don't know what the title is yet, but we're looking into that. And so that's taken much of my time right now. And so the other thing that I'm working on outside of human and organizational performance is I would characterize myself more as a full-time grandpa. And so I got 7 grandchildren that all
You
live in
can
the.
be demanding.
I'm busy, so I enjoy being a grandpa, and I got 7 grandchildren from the ages of 16 down to age 4, and so I spend a lot of time uh, playing golf, going to lacrosse games, going to football games, just a number of things. So I enjoy doing that. But um, right now, I would say that's and also you can go to either CRC Press or Routledge. Those are 2 Taylor and Francis imprints where you can look at those 2 books, and also it's available on Amazon. You can go to Amazon.com and preview those books. And then there's 2 websites, riskbasedthinking.com, that you can preview and download some free chapters from riskbasedthinking.com about that book, and the same thing for criticalsteps.com, where you can download some free chapters there, and you read those at your leisure and see if you want to read the whole book.
Okay. What about the consultancy? Are you still working on this? Where people
Yeah,
can
I'm still consulting. I have a website called Muschara.com, so basically my last name.com. But yeah, I put my focus is not so much the whole domain of H&OP, even though I can do an assessment and look at H&OP, but I would say my niche is on critical steps. The work is being done at the front lines of your organization by frontline workers, but for the most part, I'm working with line managers to help them understand what they do to help that work be successful in the long term. So
What is it? Is it something like a mentoring, or is it a consultancy? Is
it's
it
more
individual or
yeah, it's more upfront training, and then
okay.
it's upfront training, and then also as needed, we can do I can do mentoring, usually long distance. We can do mentoring like we're doing here
Okay.
online, and so that I offer those kind of services, and those are explained on my website, Muschara.com.
Okay, guys. So a lot of information. You have the books, you have the website, you have LinkedIn, you have this interview. Uh, Tony, something that I didn't ask that you want to talk a little bit about?
Hmm. I think we've covered the waterfront. Yeah, I was looking at my own notes in preparation here. I think we've covered it all.
So thank you again. It was a pleasure. I will invite your co-authors for a conversation. Maybe we can make it the 4 of us sometime, or
That
when
would
you like,
work. We've
you
done
know,
that before.
we can talk specifically about the book, maybe promoting this. It was a pleasure, and be in touch. So it's an honor having you, active. So keep moving. You have a lot of contributions to the industries. Sometimes I wrote a book as well. So sometimes we didn't imagine the reach that a
I
book can
know it.
have. But your name is being discussed across the ocean. So congratulations and thank you for everything
Thank,
you've been doing.
thank you, Hugo, for inviting me. It was an honor. It really it is.